Here is a number that should disturb you. Roughly 20% of people end up with the overwhelming majority of the wealth. The other 80% share what's left. You've heard this before, the 80-20 rule. People quote it like a fun fact, but almost no one says the brutal part out loud. The brutal part is this: which group you end up in has almost nothing to do with how hard you work. Sit with that, because it goes against everything you were told. You were promised that effort decides it. Work hard, put in the hours, stay disciplined, and you'll climb. But look around. The 80% are full of people working themselves to exhaustion. Double shifts, side jobs, sacrificing weekends, grinding for decades. And most of them will stay exactly where they are, not because they're lazy, because effort was never the thing that moved people across that line. This isn't motivation. Nobody's going to tell you to hustle harder. That advice is exactly what keeps the 80% where they are. This is something a man understood 2,500 years ago, a man so good with money that much of China still honors him as the god of wealth. His name was Fan Li. He built 3 separate fortunes from nothing, and he understood, with total clarity, the real difference between the few who rise and the many who don't. By the end of this, you're going to see the 80-20 rule the way he did, and you're going to understand which game you've actually been playing. Let's start with the lie buried inside the rule. When people hear that 20% hold most of the wealth, they assume that 20% simply worked 20% harder, 4 times harder maybe. But that math is nonsense, and you already know it. No one works 4 times harder than everyone else. There aren't enough hours. The richest people you can think of are not grinding 4 times the hours of a nurse working a double shift. So if it isn't effort, what is it? Fan Li's entire life is the answer, and the answer is this: the few and the many are not working harder or less hard than each other. They are playing 2 completely different games. The 80% play the game of effort. They trade time for money. They earn by the hour, by the task, by the shift. And the moment they stop, the money stops. Their income is chained directly to their labor, so it has a ceiling, and that ceiling is fixed by the number of hours in a day. No amount of grinding breaks it. They can only run faster inside the same cage. The 20% play a different game entirely, the game of position and timing. They don't ask, how many hours can I work? They ask, where do I need to stand and when do I need to move, so that the work pays many times over. That is the game Fan Li mastered, and it is the game almost no one is ever taught to play. Let me show you what it looks like, because Fan Li was brutally specific about it. His first principle was timing, moving against the crowd. He taught that when everyone is desperate to sell, that is the moment to buy. And when everyone is scrambling to buy, that is the moment to sell. He said it plainly: take the cheap thing as if it were treasure, and release the expensive thing as if it were dirt. The 80% do the exact opposite. They buy when everything is exciting and expensive, because everyone else is buying and it feels safe. They sell when everything is terrifying and cheap, because everyone else is panicking and they can't take the fear. They are perfectly synchronized with the crowd, and the crowd is the 80%. You see this play out in the modern world constantly. Think of Cornelius Vanderbilt, one of the wealthiest men in American history. When markets crashed and everyone around him was panic selling, Vanderbilt did the opposite. He moved in and bought, treating cash like ammunition and fear like an opportunity. He didn't work harder than the people who lost everything in those crashes. He simply stood on the other side of the panic. Same event, opposite position, and the position was everything. Pause for a second and ask yourself honestly, the last time the crowd was excited and piling into something, what did you do? And the last time the crowd was terrified and running away, what did you do? Were you moving with the 80% or against them? One word: hold it. Because most people have never once noticed that they do exactly what everyone around them does, at exactly the wrong time. Fan Li's second principle was preparation, positioning before the need arrives, not after. He had a saying, in times of drought, invest in boats. In times of flood, invest in carts. Read that again because it's the opposite of how everyone behaves. When there's a drought, no one wants a boat, so it's cheap and you buy it because you know the rains will come. When there's a flood, no one wants a cart, so it's cheap and you buy it because you know the ground will dry. He positioned himself before the turn, while the crowd only reacted after. The 80% chase what's already hot. The 20% are already holding what's about to become hot because they got there first, calmly, while it was still cheap and ignored. His third principle was the one that quietly separates the two groups for life. Never let your money sit still. He said wealth should move like flowing water, always working, always circulating, never frozen. The 80%, when they get a little money, freeze it. They lock it into a depreciating car, into objects, into a lifestyle that only drains. Their water turns to ice. The 20% keep their money flowing into things that produce more money, that compound, that work while they sleep. Same starting dollar. One person's dollar sits and slowly dies. The other person's dollar goes to work and multiplies. Do that for 10 years and the gap becomes a canyon. Not because one worked harder, but because one understood that money is a tool that should never be idle. And here is where I have to be very clear, because this is where most people go wrong about the 80-20 rule. They turn it into a conspiracy. They decide the system is rigged, that someone is holding them down, that the game is fixed against them. Fan Li would have had no patience for that. The line between the 80 and the 20 is not a wall someone built to keep you out. It's a difference in which game you chose to play, usually without realizing there was a choice. No one is stopping you from buying when others panic. No one is stopping you from positioning before the turn or keeping your money in motion. The 80% aren't trapped by a conspiracy. They're trapped by a script they never thought to question. Look at the people who suddenly receive money, lottery winners, for example. Study after study has found that a striking share of them are broke within a few years, sometimes worse off than before. If the 80-20 divide were purely about access to money, that could never happen. You handed them the money. But it happens constantly because they were handed cash without ever changing the game they play. They froze the water. They moved with their impulses. They bought what felt good. Within a few years, the money found its way back to the 20% who knew how to hold it. The number in your account was never the thing. The game you play with it is. So let's go back to where we started. 80% sharing the scraps, 20% holding the rest, and the quiet truth that effort isn't what decides it. You were never behind because you didn't work hard enough. You worked plenty hard. You were behind because you were playing the only game you were ever shown. The game of effort, of hours, of moving with the crowd. And the few who pulled ahead weren't working 4 times harder. They were standing in a different place, moving at a different time, keeping their money alive instead of letting it freeze. So don't think about how much harder you can work. Think about who you're becoming. Not someone running faster inside the 80%'s cage. Someone who finally noticed there was a second game all along and quietly started playing it. And here's the thing. Fan Li was one of an entire generation of Chinese minds who understood this game with total clarity. The investor who built his fortune buying what others threw away. The philosopher the West calls their own Machiavelli, born 1,500 years before him. The strategists who moved kingdoms with a sentence. We're decoding every one of them, one mind at a time. If this made you see, even once, which game you've actually been playing, then you already understand why most people will grind inside the 80% their whole lives and call it bad luck. A few will switch games. Decide which one you are.